Yes, a more fitting intro for this week's episode, ladies and gents, because frankly, only winners get a theme song, and the Gold Coast Football Club failed miserably on the weekend. Welcome to a dour episode of the GC Sunscast. I'm your host Shane, and joining me is a man with no TVs left in the house, Tom. Thanks for coming, even after our failed attempt at the podcast last night.
Yeah, Shane, how you going, mate? I've just come back from Harvey Norman. Had to get a new telly because the old one went out the window about 5 minutes into the second quarter on Saturday Arvo. But mind you, I'd already thrown my stubby at the telly, so it was buggered anyway. It's a good time to buy a new telly for Gold Coast Suns fans because it hasn't been much good to watch on it as far as footy's concerned.
No, Gold Coast has been pretty poor for the last few weeks now, and that leads us into the weekend's game, which most of us would like to forget. Gold Coast, 4 goals, 12-36, defeated by Geelong, 17 goals, 19, 121 points. That's an 85-point loss at our home ground. I would have to say that is one of the worst games Gold Coast Football Club has ever put up. We had 41 tackles, the 4th lowest in club history, and that's saying something because this year we have been up the pointy end of the stats for tackles in games.
Yeah, we've been the best for tackles, and we had bloody great crowd turn up. I mean, it could have been better, but in terms of where we're at right now, it was fantastic. Look, I do have some comments to make on the umpiring. I just feel like we don't get the rub of the green, and I think that the first quarter and into the second quarter there were 10 things that I was probably more frustrated by the umpiring than the playing. And then after the second quarter was finished, I realised that our blokes do not face adversity very well at all, and something's got to change.
No, it was a dreadful performance. They didn't even look like they wanted to be out there. It was the equal lowest score at Metricon. We haven't scored lower than 36 points at Metricon. It was the second time. The first time was against Sydney back in 2011. So it just shows that the side is a shadow of who they should be.
Yeah, we had high hopes for this game because you've got a star marquee player returning after leaving. In the case of Ablett, well, he's the son of a champion, and he is a champion, and he did leave his family club. He was a father-son. However, so it's not as bad as some of the other players who just abandon the Suns because they want quick success. You kind of expect that when your former captain's coming back to play and everything that's been said in the off season, that the players would be super fired up, not just to have a few silly bumps and tackles and whatever, but to actually just show Geelong that we're actually a better team than them. Because we've been flogging them. We flogged them last year. We flogged them in the pre-season, and there were no signs there that they were going to absolutely belt us because they've been in poor form, and yet they turned up and we didn't.
No, that we didn't, and that's the most disappointing thing about it. The club and everyone on the Gold Coast has been hyping this game up, and it didn't deliver from about 5 minutes into that first quarter. Up until then, it was fantastic. Amy Shark was a great performance. They had fireworks, entertainment for the kids. It was great, especially the first 5 minutes. Archie kicked a goal, Lynch kicked a goal and looked strong. But after that, no one looked like they wanted to be there, except for the one man that I'd like to mention, Touk Miller. He was fantastic. He was the only son out there that was still trying hard and tackling.
That's because Touk. He only has 1 year, and that's full blast. And last year he was playing injured, and he was still good. And this year he's playing with a clean injury bill, and he's going to be the best and fairest. It's almost over. There's no one else who's, Lyons was getting as many possessions, but he's been dropped. Swallow is probably the only other midfielder who could compare, but really Miller's the guy who just shows all heart. You got to feel for Jared Wicks. He's one of the best ruckmen in the comp, and he's not getting reward for effort. We've got to really improve in that area. we did okay in clearances. I looked at some of the stats after the game to see redeeming features, and clearances was something that we actually managed to sort of halve. It was sort of par for the course, but what's that, a C plus? The best thing we did was manage to be competitive at clearances. It's an area that's maybe improved a little bit. It goes from opponent to opponent. If we play like that against GWS, the score's going to be more than 85, though. I was looking for improvement in players. So, Jack Bowes in the second half, he shut down Geelong's most destructive player in Duncan. You want to see, you want to be able to easily say, oh yeah, there were 10 blokes, but I have to choose a top five. It's hard to fill out a top five, isn't it? Maybe Swallow for effort and in a very high pressure situation. Rory Thompson did well in the back line. He pretty much shut down Hawkins, apart from some bad umpiring calls, and he might have let Hawkins get away once or twice, but he definitely did well and did better than Hawkins.
I would only have a special mention to Ainsworth. I think he is a new player, a new man running through that midfield.
Absolutely agree with you. He's found his home. He wasn't doing so well in the forward line earlier in the year, but he's been given that task. I think I remember in an earlier podcast you questioned perhaps what Ainsworth's role or task was, and I believe that he's been building up to getting more minutes in the midfield, and that he's succeeded at that, and I'm really rapt for him because he's the future, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely. I'm sold. I believe that he is now a midfielder, not a small forward. Where leave that small forward position open to the likes of Archie or Lemons. But there is room for new players to come into the side this week. We've been hit with another spade full of injuries, so it's starting to look like seasons of old. Aaron Hall is out for 10 to 12 weeks with a pec injury. So that could be his last game for the Suns. He's probably unlikely to play again this year. Stephen May is out for 4 to 6 weeks with an ankle injury. And Young is likely to miss this week with an ankle injury as well. And Cade Collar-Jasny was a late withdrawal from the reserve side. And he's gone to see a specialist regarding concussion. And it doesn't look good. There's real concerns over whether he'll play again at all, let alone this year.
Yeah, a lot of bad news there, and not just from the AFL team, but the NEFL team. Jesse Lonergan, had a little bit of a hamstring problem, didn't play out the match. He'll be back in a few weeks, but still, the depth is the concern at this stage of the season. Poor old Colo. His twin brother came out yesterday on AFL.com.au saying that he had real concerns for his brother, and that kind of thing, more than the speculation and more than trying to guess, has he had too many concussions? When a family member comes out and says that, it's getting serious. I don't think Colo himself would be really allowed to talk about the full extent of the injury because of sort of the club would want to shut that kind of thing down. And it was a bit of a dirty tackle, but in the NEFL, but he'd just been best on ground, and it was a sling tackle. Actually gave him whiplash, and that's the problem. He was actually named to play NEFL because he pulled up physically fit. It's again the concussion issues. I can only speculate on what he's talked about in the past. He talked about the reason that he was just completely shut down for the second half of last year was because he had problems with things like focusing, and he had constant headaches. And, I mean, if those are the symptoms that have come up in the last week, well, he might not play another game of footy.
No, that's the real concern here with Cade Collar-Jasny. So all the best to him. Again, we've said that before in this podcast, which is a real concern in itself. The reserve side did go on for a resounding win against Southport Sharks. Gold Coast kicked 14 goals, 9.93 to the Sharks 12 goals, 7.79. Barlow was best on ground with 42 disposals, 10 tackles and 9 clearances. Powell had 21 disposals, 2 goals, and Shear 28 disposals. Crossley kicked 5 goals as well, so that was good. And Peter Wright seemed to play predominantly ruck, had the 18 disposals and 37 hitouts. All of those boys are in line to come back into the senior squad this week. Maybe not Lyons, though. He only had 23 disposals, 4 tackles, and 10 clearances. So besides his clearances, his numbers were down even for NEFL level.
Yeah, I mean, as far as clearances go, if Brodie's still in the team, as we'd expect, he's the one who can get in and get the clearances instead of Lyons. So I saw Brodie coming in with 4 Lyons. So Lyons making his way back in, he'll want to do a lot better than that. You'd imagine Barlow comes in for Hall. You'd imagine Leslie comes in for May, and Wright probably comes in for Young. It does give us that option of Day going back to the back line if Leslie and Thompson can't handle. GWS do have the big forwards down there, so you never know. And you're also looking at some form from guys like Lemons and Scrimshaw in the NEFL, and you imagine at this stage of the season, Lemons would certainly be a welcome addition, and perhaps it's time for Scrimshaw because he's been putting together some great performances, especially through the midfield, which up to now he's just been a backman. He did play back on Saturday, but he's been playing before that since he is. The thing to remember with Scrimshaw is he hasn't had a great resume this year of games in a row. He injured himself earlier in the year in the NEFL. He broke his cheek actually, or his jawbone, and he had a fracture. And he came back relatively sooner than anyone thought, and he's been playing really well. So he's showing the passion and desire. I don't know if you heard about it today, but there's a bit of a rumour that Scrimshaw is looking to get out of the last 2 years of his contract. And I don't buy it, but or maybe I don't know what that person knows, but I think Scrimshaw, he's got to come in sometime this year, and if it's sooner than later, we'll see what he's got.
Yeah, that comment seemed to be from a random Twitter fan. I mean, there was no real evidence behind it, so at this stage, just got to assume that he's happy here. He is signed up till 2020, so Gold Coast have all the cards. So there's a lot of potential for players to come from the NEFL side into the senior side this week, with us playing GWS and the amount of injuries we've suffered, as well as the terrible form from a lot of the players in the side. Besides Tuke Miller, maybe Ainsworth and Witts and Swallow, there's not too many other players that are guaranteed a spot next week. It really depends on where the Gold Coast are taking their list build strategy, really, whether they're going to go from a rebuild side and play all the kids next week, or whether they still try to put out the best possible side they can. It's going to create an interesting matchup because the Gold Coast Suns and GWS are the 2 expansion clubs. There's a bit of a rivalry there between them. It all comes down to, I guess, a lot of the perspective from the media about the 2 clubs having a similar startup, but that's not the case, is it? We've done a bit of research this week and come across a few things that has been done differently between the 2 clubs. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, historically, we know the Suns were first out of the gate, and in fact, the Suns franchise was actually well put together with the Southport Sharks coming in as the patron partners, and that was a $10 million investment over 10 years, and we're in the 8th year of that. And just a tremendous effort to get this club, really like the Phoenix rising out of the ashes. You're probably not old enough to have seen the Bears at Carrara, but I certainly was. Not the same franchise, but bringing a new franchise. Thank you, Christopher Skase, for our lights. We love them. We know they weren't actually paid for, but he still did the dodgy deal to get them in the first place. And, we've now gone through the pain that we had to go through to get our stadium, which was the Commonwealth Games. I don't see that GWS has had anywhere near as difficult an entry in the AFL. They've pretty much been given everything on a silver platter. And it goes right back to when they first came in with their first draft, which seemed the same kind of concessions that they were given, the same as ours. But what everyone forgets is that we were given, a few zone selections from Queensland and Northern Territory, which were substandard players, almost none of which are still on the list, apart from Stephen May. And then that second year of the Suns, where we should have been given more concessions at the draft, GWS was given the whole bloody draft, and so we barely managed to draft any players in the second, third, and fourth years where we should have been consolidating, and instead all the concessions were given to the GWS team in that time.
Yeah, it was. And not just that, they had an extension in their salary cap, about $3 million over 3 years. So that was more than us. Then the quality, like you said, the quality of players GWS had from the zone selections, blokes like Shield, Treloar, Cameron, they're still superstars. And with the exception of Treloar, who's now over at Collingwood, Shield and Cameron are still in the Giants' first team. You've also got Wilson and Bug, who are playing at other clubs now, but both pushing for their selection in strong sides.
Well, it's just kept them in every draft, hasn't it? They've been in the top five of every draft ever, because even though they've had a few guys who they've brought in, they've managed to, in some cases, trade up with the player. Now, we've done that too, but we first developed the player. It was over a much longer period with the likes of Prestia and O'Meara and Dixon. Those guys.
I think the trap there was we invested in players that were 17 years old with the mini draft with Jack Martin and Jaeger O'Meara. We had to wait an extra year to play them. And in the end, O'Meara's buggered off because he wants to drive an Audi. And, Martin's still chugging along, but he got injured in his first year, in his first game of AFL football.
The first quarter, almost his first touch,
Martin essentially had 2 years before he was able to play a game of AFL and get into any sort of rhythm.
And we had to give a draft pick to GWS just to get Martin in the first place. So they're even ahead of us on that one. That was probably down to us wanting to get that pick, but it just goes to show that they probably had better advice over how to build their list, because we built our list with Gary Ablett and then the rest, and they built their list with guys like Ward and Scully, and even the older guys like Power and Corns. And even though those guys didn't play too much, they instilled something in the team. They pretty much mentored their replacements into AFL footy.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the players, it was the coaches. We had got a first-time coach, Guy McKenna, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe most of our assistants were first-timers as well. Malcolm Blight didn't jump into a overseer-type role until the second year, and I don't believe that lasted very long anyway. The culture that Sheedy and Mark Williams brought to the club, and then a succession plan to Leon Cameron. GWS had the culture put in place. They forced all the young kids to be, in a way, it was kind of like a community prison or something. They were forced, these kids, to stay in this area, so essentially they could keep an eye on them so they didn't stuff up. Whereas up here on the Gold Coast, they were happy just to go wherever they wanted. There was no one watching these players and guiding them through some very tough decisions and some new life scenarios for them. So that's where the culture problems developed, and that caused a lot of the issues. And it didn't help when our captain at the time, Gary Ablett, was living in Melbourne or flying down to Melbourne on a constant basis and missing a lot of the training sessions. Yet you can't have rules for some and rules for others. It's not going to work with such a young group.
No, you're quite right about that. And another discrepancy is that the GWS's list has always been bigger than ours. So in our inception year before we played AFL, we had 48 players on the list. Well, the following year, GWS were allowed to start with 50. So GWS were able to have guys like James McDonald from Melbourne and Luke Power, who didn't play every game, but they went on to become coaches after that. So how good would that be to have that? I mean, we're only now sort of getting that. We did have Fraser for a while. He didn't play so much. We didn't do that well in getting the B grade players or the end of career players to come up and with a coaching role in mind. But they were allowed to have the extra spots for it. Put it this way, the comparison goes 46 to 50, 42 to 50, 40 to 48, 38 to 46, 38 to 44, 38 to 42, and then finally in the seventh year this year, it'll be 38 all plus your rookies. So they've had all these they've had between 4 and 8 extra spots on their roster for these players who are in the end of their careers, which we've got those players in there now, but we don't have enough room for other players. And we didn't have the extra salary cap for other players who, could have made all the difference. It's just baffling as to why they wouldn't continue to give us some of the concessions they've given Greater Western Sydney. I'm really, really angry about it, actually, because I've sort of known about some of the things. Like in isolation, you might read an article that says, GWS are getting an extra $1 million a year and the Suns have had that COLA taken off them. But when you add all the figures up, GWS they've had 3 extra top 5 draft picks as concessions than us. They've had $3 million extra dollars in the salary cap, as you pointed out. The recruitment is one thing. The academy was another thing. The GWS had their set up of their academy, and they were getting terrific players from the Riverina for one area. The Suns Academy has now reached a point where we can say it has started to work, but nowhere near the number of players available and the quality of players available as GWS. I am confident that has somewhat been equalised, given that the Riverina region has been removed from the GWS zone. And another change that's been made is that the Northern Territory zone was actually originally a Queensland zone, as we know with Stephen May, but then it was given to GWS, and they had it for a few years, and subsequently it's been taken off them and now given to Victorian clubs, funnily enough. But I just have to reiterate the amount of players that GWS were able to get from within their own zones just eclipses the amount of players that the Suns have been provided access to.
Yeah, it has. And that's basically the AFL's mistakes. But we're not denying the Gold Coast Football Club has made some mistakes as well. I mean, we can go back to some of the players they've drafted. There's half a dozen players you can name that, aren't up to AFL standards. There's the culture problems that have been created. There is just a never-ending list of problems the Gold Coast Football Club has created. And, I mean, you could even go as recent as the trade period last year, selling off pick 2 for Lockie Weller. We did get Charlie Ballard back from that deal as well, and it's too early to tell whether it was a big win or loss, but that's something that isn't considered at the moment to be a good move. And then you've also got the draft picks that were traded to West Coast Eagles for their first round pick. You can't predict where a team's going to finish on the ladder, but this is absolutely blown up in their face. There's no way they would have predicted West Coast to be first at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, at the time I thought, that's pretty much putting all your eggs in one basket. I think with regards to the Weller deal, he's been well above average, is what I would say this year, and he's played every game, and sometimes he's been in the top 5, and he's been consistent. So give him some time. He was originally a 14 pick, so whether or not he ends his career as being, a definite number 2 pick value, well, I don't think so, but he's definitely first round value. And we can't forget that Charlie Ballard's now made his debut. So what have we got? 14 games out of the pair of them. Well, for a start, any player we had drafted in their place at number 2 couldn't possibly have contributed that much. So we were already sort of ahead. Give it 5 years, and maybe it'll turn into the Judd trade. And I don't know that Weller's going to win a Brownlow or anything like that. But if Weller and Ballard can sort of show that they're top 22 players, then I'd much rather have 2 of those blokes than the crapshoot of the number 2 pick. Because look at the last 20 number 2 draft picks, and I'll show you at least 10 busts.
Do you think are there any other mistakes that come to mind for you that the Gold Coast Football Club have made that have contributed to their current position?
If we're talking about trades, we didn't do particularly well in 2015. In the 2015, we brought in guys like Ryan Davis, Cameron Lorch, Jared Grant, Dan Curry, and they're all gone. Matt Rose has been decent value, but he's probably gone now too. What we probably needed at that time was an elite player to come in, and because Ablett certainly didn't play very much in that period of time.
You're talking about player retention here, and that's probably one of the biggest mistakes the club has made in their short history. There are issues they could have addressed, from the culture issues to the medical or lack of medical staff and knowledge up here, to prevent players like O'Meara, Dixon, Bennell from leaving the club because they didn't feel they were getting the support they needed here. So if the Suns had addressed those sort of issues from the beginning, we might not be in this predicament, but we are in this predicament. And like most of the Victorian media, they seem to be begging for us to pack up shop and move down to Tasmania. Why do they think Tasmania is going to be more successful for a football club than the Gold Coast? I mean, what 20-year-old wants to move down to Tasmania, one of the coldest places in Australia and with the oldest age demographic in Australia? It's probably not a go-to destination.
No, I mean, it's just madness. Living in Melbourne, you kind of learn where to get your news from, because there are hack media, personalities down here who, for one reason and another, they have a large following, probably because, when it's cold and if your team's doing crap, you want to hear about some other team who's doing even worse. People down here don't even know about any factual information about the Suns, because they're too busy reading this bullshit that gets published in the Herald Scum every day, which just gets reprinted in all of the other Murdoch media around the place. And it's just rubbish. I mean, I've been to Tassie recently, and it's not a bad place, Hobart. I didn't really venture too far out of Hobart, but I did talk to a lot of locals, and they say, well, we get along to the occasional game. North Melbourne comes here. They're all right if they're doing well. We'll sort of follow them a bit. I couldn't speak to the Hawthorn Launceston crew because they're so far up the road. People just don't travel that far. So if you had one team for a start, where would you put them? Is it going to be the Hobart Suns or the Launceston Suns? Well, I imagine that Hawthorn would be pretty annoyed if we trod on their toes, because I think they get about $1 million a year from the state of Tasmania in sponsorship to put Tasmania logo on their jerseys. I cannot see how Tasmania could sustain an 11-game. They end up being like a 7-game club and having to sell 4 home games somewhere else. It doesn't make sense, but it suits the narrative of the morons who have just death-ridden the Suns from the very, very beginning, and that they just, in a way, they're anti-AFL. They don't ever talk about anything that's good for the AFL. So if you're going to look at the Suns as an entity and what the good things that they've done and the foundations that are laid for the future, well, first of all, there's the stadium. Second of all, there's the Suns Academy, which is attracting some really, really high talent, some good talent. Jack Bowes, if Jack Bowes wasn't sort of nominated for the Suns Academy, every single club in the country would have wanted him. So therefore, you look at the growth, and this isn't just the Suns, but the Lions as well, and the AFL have poured the money into developing junior footy in Queensland, and the participation has just gone through the roof. I think one figure I read was something like 228% increase in female participation in AFL just in the Gold Coast area alone. The Suns have got a women's team coming in a couple of years. We've got juniors. The talent academy isn't just for boys; it's for girls as well. So we're going to end up with a team almost solely that come from Queensland, and they're going to win the bloody thing in the first year.
Yeah, well, the Gold Coast isn't going anywhere. The football club is here to stay in the competition. It is a national competition now, so the Victorians that are pushing this agenda need to probably go back to just following the VFL, because that's obviously what they want. But there is enough support up here for the Gold Coast Suns to continue to exist. The amount of tourism dollars that it brings, like in a couple of, I think a month or so, we've got Collingwood and Essendon playing games up here back to back during the Victorian school holidays. That's a huge boost in tourism to the Gold Coast economy. So the Queensland government and Gold Coast Council want the Gold Coast Suns here to stay, especially with all the money that's been pumped into the Commonwealth Games facilities that the Suns now occupy.
Well, it's a return on investment, isn't it? And the Suns have had a hard time getting those entities to actually pony up, and so they finally have, and now it's the Suns' job to justify it. And I think we will in spades.
Yeah, exactly. And with your point on the academies as well, participation numbers are up. AFL is actually being played in schools now. 15 years ago, when I was in high school, AFL was not a school sport. It wasn't played, and no one would even consider playing it. Now it is actually played in high schools. So that's proof that AFL is breaking in to a predominantly rugby league dominated territory, which is fantastic for the AFL and the sport. Now that we've gone through the mistakes and the negatives about the Gold Coast Football Club, the stuff they've had to endure, the stuff the AFL stuffed up, let's go through and look for some hope and what can be done to fix these issues. I mean, for starters, I'll start here with what the AFL can do. I believe AFL assistance is necessary for three things. One, for finance. They need to give the Gold Coast Suns every chance to be able to pay for not players in particular. Mind you, the odd ambassadorial money would be handy to keep certain players, but more so to ensure that the Gold Coast Football Club has enough money to pay staff, and not just regular staff, but top of the line staff that can run the football club and give the players the support they need. Medical, coaches, all that sort of stuff is with the football department spending, which the AFL can assist with. And then also priority picks. It was discussed the other night on the couch about rebuilds need to happen quicker. The Gold Coast Suns are in that position. Whether we like it or not, they are in a rebuild position, and we haven't played finals in the 8 years that we've been in the competition. So it's bloody time the AFL step up and give us a hand with draft picks. Yes, we stuffed up the first round of concessions back in 2010, 2011, but we can't stay down here forever. It's only going to bleed the AFL dry unless they help us get up. So even end the first round draft picks, they can help us. We're not asking for 4 or 5 top 10 draft picks, just 1 or 2.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that, and I think we've actually had to make our own luck at the draft. So we've had to trade away players, we've had to make trades that look questionable now. We've really sort of struggled. We are getting multiple first round draft picks. I mean, last year we spent those on Weller, Ballard, and Powell, and people didn't agree with any of it at the time. But time will tell if it plays out. So at 2016, we did really well. We did, we did. There's no argument there. Even if you look past the four top 10 draft picks that we made, and it is arguable how well they've gone from that. Brad Shear, he went at 74 or something like that, but he's an academy pick, and he was nominated. So it would have just been mean spirited of another club to try and grab him and cost us extra. So I think he was just. Honestly think he would have gone late second, early third rather than fourth round, and late fourth round at that. Um, and it goes to show that the guys who've come from the academy, well, they've been in the system longer, so they've played more games than the other guys who were all picked ahead of them. And then we can't really evaluate 2017 draft because it's only just happened, really, in terms of the players having opportunities to get in. But four of them have made, or sorry, three of them have made their debut, and two or three more look like making their debut by the end of the season. So we haven't gone too bad there. And don't forget, we've got Nick Holman as a rookie. So by the end of the year, it's potential. There's a potential that all of the players that we picked in the last 3 years, and the players we traded for as well, and that's 27 players, by the way, in just in the last three trade and draft periods. So the argument is there to say we've brought in quality players, brought in mature ages as well as experienced players, as well as a lot of high draft picks and academy players, most importantly. They've all played or will play by the end of the year. So the rebuild's been on, and it's fair to say that give it another draft period at the end of this year, and we'll see where the rebuild's at.
Yeah, so the equalisation with priority picks and stuff, that's going to help us get to that draft situation. It's going to help us with getting young kids coming through, getting the future of the club in there. But then that leads to my third point. The AFL needs to stand up and probably give us $1 million, heck, $1.5 million, maybe even $2 million extra in the salary cap, so that one, we can keep players up here with player retention issues, and two, give us a chance to, recruit some established AFL players up to the Gold Coast, one or two, just to help us with until the youth come through. And this time, Gold Coast shouldn't make the mistake of just letting them do whatever they want. Stuart Dew is in place now, and he is the sort of coach that's going to stick to his structure. Everyone's the same. You've got to get in, you've got to help, no matter who you are. And I think that is just going to help bond the group together. So the extra $1 million or $2 million in the salary cap, I mean, you've got Eddie Maguire and club president saying, oh, this is unfair and everything. They wouldn't stop whinging when Brisbane had it, but that helped Brisbane climb up into finals contention. Yes, they won flags. That's what the whole point of finals is.
And I think Brisbane made their own luck as well with that. They had, funnily enough, they had this bloke named Scott Clayton building their list, and then he never quite got the sustained success that they wanted. After that, they brought in this coach named Lee Matthews, who I believe a lot of those concessions and stuff came from him being arguably the best player ever, or him and Barassi and maybe one or two other blokes could be mentioned as the best player / coach in history. He certainly had sustained success, and even back then, before the 3 premierships, it's bloody obvious. He's gone straight to the AFL and said, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that, and he's won it for them. And then he's made the best of his luck and gone on. If I'm honest with you, I've done an analysis of the Lions list in the years leading up to their premiership years. Not a lot of difference. They had a lot of hits and misses, but they could afford it because they had the extra salary cap. So they could afford Lynch. So it works. We know it.
That's it. We need the player retention that the salary cap allowance would give us. And sure, the Victorian clubs are going to be up in arms. South Australian clubs, WA clubs, they'll all be up in arms. Oh, it's an unfair advantage. But it isn't, because most of the time a player leaves to go to another club, or at least with the Gold Coast Suns and Brisbane, It's because they want to return home. They want to go play for a successful club. Well, give us the salary cap so we can keep players so we can have a successful club. And two, we need some way to compete when half of these players in the competition live in Victoria, probably a third live in South Australia, and a few more live in WA. There's a very small player pool of Queenslanders in the competition, and I think most of them are already playing in Queensland. So we don't really have players that we can just go and pull back home to offset this. So we need help to keep players. The Victorian clubs don't have that issue because they're in the heartland of football, and 50% of the players, I'm going to guess, are from Victoria. It's not an issue. They've just got to worry about the other 9 clubs in Victoria.
Well, they have no problem drafting our players. North Melbourne's got a couple of former Suns Academy players. Freo picked Weller. We had to buy him back at a premium. I dare say if we tried to trade with North Melbourne to get their guys back, their guys haven't played a whole lot of footy, and one of them, Bruce, is a ruckman. I'd love to have him at the Suns, but he'd probably be third or fourth in our list of ruckman. So we just don't actually need him. And the other bloke whose name eludes me for the moment, I'm going to say Josh something.
Josh Thomas?
No, he's Collingwood, if I recall, but he's another one who I think he's 27. He could potentially be a target, but again, he knocked us back when we first tried to get him before, and he and Dane Beams both knocked us back. They're Gold Coast products. So Collingwood's happy to have Gold Coast players play for them and help them win premierships. But when it comes to us, drafting Victorian guys, well, as soon as we get a decent player, they're trying to bloody lure him back to Victoria. We've got to have a bit more protection. I've got no doubt that one day there'll be a tell-all from Scott Clayton, and he'll come out and say, he's hinted at it last year just before he got sacked. Which 17-year-olds told him, if you draft me, I'm going to request to go back to Victoria or wherever in 2 years. Why is it that we've had these drafts that have, in a way, been compromised because you've got these little smartasses who, it goes back and back to the number of guys. Probably goes back to Buckley was the first one who, he just said, nah, I'm not going to be drafted anywhere except Collingwood, and skipped a year of AFL and stayed in the Sandful, and he won the Magarey medal. And then the AFL stood firm on him, and he got drafted to Brisbane, and he lasted a year in Brisbane and said, I want to go straight back to Collingwood. And Brisbane were foolish enough to think that they could talk him around. And he didn't play badly. I mean, the one thing I will say about Buckley is that he came to Brisbane and he played quite well in the year he played for Brisbane, but he never intended to stay past that 1 year. Never ever intended to, and that it goes back to that. And if we haven't learnt anything since then about these little smartasses who happen to be talented, but they don't have any intention of staying where they're drafted to. Well, the Suns have had no chance with certain players who have gone on to do very well. I'd love to know which ones have told Clayton and told their agents to say that if they get selected at the Suns, that it's a waste of a draft pick because they're just not going to commit.
Yeah, I'd love to know too. So that's what the AFL can do to fix their mistakes to help the Gold Coast Suns. But it's not just on the AFL, it's on the Gold Coast Football Club as well. What are some of the things they can do?
I think you touched on it a little earlier. It's unfortunate because after a few seasons, you get to sort of know who the staff are, who the assistant coaches are, and you sort of you see interviews and whatever. But I think Stewie Dew has come in and he's the right choice and he's doing a lot of good things. But I don't see any evidence that the assistant coaching staff that he inherited really deserve more of a chance. If we're where we are right now, and those blokes haven't been able to lift the list up to where they should be, then I don't know if we have to blame the players so much as we have to replace those assistant coaches. And it's something that a head coach needs to be able to say, all right, Solomon or maybe Lovett stays. I've always been positive about Primus because I think he was a great player and a great captain and coaching material. But maybe the reason Port was shit when he was their coach is because he's just not that good a coach. We need to have more assistant coaches, as you say, and more people, in the back room being able to bring us up to the level of the Collingwoods of the competition. Who's I think they spend, so more money than anyone else on their football department. It's the first place that we should be looking at. Secondly, you would like to think that our new list management team, I believe it's more of a team than just sort of a one person and a few scouts. You'd like to believe that they're going to do a better job of things this year. We won't know until we see what they manage to do at the draft, but that could certainly be enhanced. Again, going back to the academy, if we're doing well with the academy, surely we can continue to put more money into it, more development into it, and it seems to me that the academy sort of has this kind of compromised season where our NEFL team relies on some academy players to make up the numbers in the early season, and then it's all the players who don't get selected for Allies who are sort of going to be playing through the middle part of the season. It's good that the academy players have the opportunity to play, but I'm just buggered if I could justify having 16-year-olds play in what's supposed to be a very, very high-level competition. And we saw it a few weeks ago when the Suns just got belted by Brisbane, and Brisbane had a near AFL strength side. So this is where it goes back to the concessions that we weren't given, that GWS were given, which is a larger list. And, have it maybe, what if we had, say, just for example, of players who are running around the NEFL, if we had Andrew Swallow playing as a non-AFL eligible player, would he have come to play on a contract just for the NEFL team with potentially a coaching role up the road? There are other players who are very good. They're just not AFL standard, who could perform a role like a mentoring role in the NEFL. I think Jake Spencer's another one who's gone up to Aspley to play ruck. He would have been someone who could have come along and just filled out that sort of 48th, 49th spot on a roster. I was a big fan of the reserves coming back in, and I think that would have meant that the AFL lists would have grown larger. I think that would really benefit the Suns because from what I've read and what I've spoken to other fans of other clubs, they have, like, for example, in Victoria, their reserves teams are actually full of career players who have maybe not, stayed on AFL lists or even made it to AFL lists, but they're not that far below in standard, and they're certainly at the standard of that second tier competition. And yet we're scraping the bottom of the barrel with our, untried debutant 16-year-olds. I'm sorry, but it's too much too soon. We should be playing those academy guys in the games that are designed for them, playing against high schools around the country, and developing them, not setting them in against men, and hindering their development.
Yeah, you're definitely right there. It seems like our NEFL side is all over the place with players coming in and out, always looking for top-ups, and players like Scrimshaw and Shear, when they're playing in the NEFL side, they can't get any cohesion together and learn how to play, because there's always these new kids coming in, taking up spots. So that is another big issue, and it's something that the AFL could address by providing more list spots or an allowance for the Gold Coast Suns to recruit specific players purely for their reserve side.
Well, how is it that teams like Richmond and Fitzroy and whatnot can have all of these top-up players available, and yet the Suns don't? That's what baffles me. Why is it that let's say, for example, Richmond, they won the premiership last year, and I think they made the grand final in the VFL. And the year before that, Footscray won the VFL. But Footscray had such a long injury list that year that where were their extra players coming from? They don't have an academy. So are we sort of being told, well, you can have this extra money for an academy? And by the way, just as a small aside, if anyone has any sort of bloody argument against us getting extra money, well, for one thing, GWS got all this extra money that we didn't, all these extra concessions that we didn't, so it's kind of owed to us. But, secondly, we're only in our 8th season into developing this club. And one of the reasons that we were brought in the first place, and GWS, was to create that 9th game to broadcast every week. So essentially, if you go and have a look at the billions of dollars that the AFL's been given in their broadcasting deal for radio, TV, internet, you name it, us having that 18th spot means that there's literally truck piles of money extra that have been won by the AFL. So they could spend that 18th of their budget on the Suns and still have millions left over. So anyone who cries about the money that's being spent at the Suns, and if the Suns have like some sort of shortfall here or there, that's not important. The money wouldn't be there if the Suns didn't exist. The Suns do exist. The money is there. So the AFL's got to spend it.
Yeah, that's right. And that probably wraps us up. We've been going for over an hour now. We've pretty much covered the problems here at the Gold Coast Football Club, the problems from the inception of the club right through to now. And we've tried to find some highlights, some hope to give to the fans. All right. Well, thanks for joining me again, Tom. Have a good night, and I'll see you next week.
See you, mate.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the GC Sunscast. If you like what you hear, please get involved in our small community over on bigfooty.com on the Gold Coast board. Chat with myself, Sunners, and Tom, 17er, as well as dozens of other Gold Coast fans. You can reach me on Facebook or Twitter at 32bitshane, or email me 32bitshane@gmail.com with any queries. Leave a comment or review on iTunes and SoundCloud, or a donation on Patreon. Just search GC Sunscast. Donations are in US dollars and will go towards